Hey all, how's everyone? You're with me, Mr. Dex, and a massive welcome to the channel. So, the Battlefield 5 trailer has been released, along with some pretty nice announcements made by DICE. I did have an analysis ready to go from the trailer within a few hours of it airing, but there was just so much for me to process in such a short space of time, and yeah, basically what I'm saying is I was way wrong, guys. That's what I'm trying to say. So, I basically scrapped that pile of trash and started over. But the good news is, now that we have a bunch of information that I've been able to digest and paint a much clearer picture of what the game might actually look like and how it will compare with Battlefield 1. Because let's be honest, if a trailer is designed to build hype, I think this one was a crowd splitter at best. Especially if you weren't watching the entire live stream, as from the way the developers described it, they really did suggest the game would be something quite different to what we saw in the trailer, which painted a pretty warped picture of World War II if I'm being honest. But I also don't think the trailer is a great reflection of the game itself, and I'm not the only one to have said this. I think the purpose of the trailer was to cram everything that was possible in the game into a short 2-minute video, to open up our minds to the gameplay possibilities, rather than paint a picture of how the game would feel, which clearly didn't work so well, a lesson I think the marketing team over at DICE have definitely learned by now. I mean, I could be wrong, but at the end of the day, even though I wasn't completely happy with every detail of the reveal, I did like it overall. And I'm also hoping by now that the controversy surrounding that reveal trailer has died down a bit. I guess it did leave a lot of people pretty disappointed, particularly those who wanted a really gritty, realistic game. But do remember guys, it is just a trailer, and DICE couldn't really do a carbon copy of the Battlefield 1 reveal, because that would have gone down just as poorly in my opinion. So we don't actually know how the game will feel just yet. Either way, it wasn't what most people were expecting, and it definitely triggered a pretty heavy backlash from the community, but I won't dwell. I've made a video about the response to the trailer already, which itself also had some pretty mixed feedback. I do want to clarify because I'm not so sure how successful I was at explaining my point of view, that I do understand and agree with both sides to an extent, and it's absolutely fine if you're unhappy with what DICE have created. My frustration was with how one-dimensional and petty some of the comments on the trailer were, but let's ignore that part for now. Let's move on and talk about Battlefield 5 as a game. What will it offer? What will it be like? And most importantly, will it be better than Battlefield 1? And if so, how? Now, there's been a lot to digest, so I'm going to talk about this in terms of what I think the biggest things are. So first up, let's tackle the most divisive detail and get it straight out of the way. Battlefield 5 has what appears to be a very heavy emphasis on customization. Now, while there appears to be some degree of customization available for the weapons themselves, I'm not going to lie, I'd be pretty surprised if that level of weapon customization goes as far as what was seen in previous titles like Battlefield 3 and 4. Although I do hear that the vehicle customization should be fairly extensive. You can see from this screenshot what you seem to be able to customize. How accurate this is and whether this is just one part of a customization screen, I'm not sure, but I think for better or worse, most of the customization is going to be for the visual elements of the game. You can customize your character's appearance, gender, clothing, and the weapon skins and such, which does detract from the historical accuracy, I admit this. And it's fair to say a lot of people aren't happy about this either, quite passionately so, which is absolutely fair enough. Even for me, I'd prefer the degree of customization to be slightly less extensive, but we all also have to admit that the options for customization in Battlefield 1 is pretty poor. 2 years after the game is released and we still only have 2 types of legendary skin per weapon, and even then, most of these are essentially the same skin remodeled for different weapons. Doesn't really make you feel like it's your soldier on the battlefield, although as I mentioned, I think maybe they've swung it a little far the other way in Battlefield 5.
I'm not too sure. Remember, all we have is the trailer to work on and not a lot else. How accessible these skins will be is still relatively unknown. I mean, if you press me for a prediction, if you really press me, my guess would be that the focus on customization is tied quite closely with their announcement on the removal of the Premium Pass. I get that a lot of the cost of the Premium Pass will just be transferred to the base game price, which is elevated, but DICE have also promised that they will be dishing out loads of content over the game's lifetime, and without Premium, they have no extra revenue streams to fund this. So I'm betting that the revenue will come from being able to pay for soldier and weapon skins, in addition to them being accessible through the progression system. I think that's why we see such a degree of customization in the trailer, and if a bit of unnecessary creative freedom is the cost for keeping the player base together, I personally think I can live with that. Although, I hope they don't go mental with it. Everything needs to be relevant to the era.
But speaking of progression, that brings me to my next point, the progression system, which looks far, far superior to that of Battlefield 1's, which, let's face it, became pretty much non-existent after class level 10, and even then, it wasn't that great to begin with. There was basically no structure to it at all. Battlefield 5's progression system, on the other hand, seems to focus on specialization, and not just at a class level, but even deeper, suggesting that you can have even more specialized roles within your class, which I think is pretty cool. And you're going to be rewarded for the more time that you play. That's the deal. The more points you rack up, the more skins, perks, and weapons you have access to, which is exactly what I was hoping for from Battlefield 5's progression system. Appearance-wise, the graphics are stunning. I mean, they're always stunning. One thing we can pretty much always guarantee from DICE is quality graphic and sound design. The explosions, for example, look and sound awesome. I can almost feel myself bracing for impact from the shockwaves, so they pretty much nailed this side of things. But it still feels wrong somehow, and my friend Gergely pointed out why. What I've been struggling to put my finger on is the color. The color schemes in Battlefield 5 are much more bright and vivid than in Battlefield 1. Like the grass, for example. It's so green it almost looks radioactive. The colors in the faces of the characters as well are bright and not actually all that realistic, which makes it look pretty for sure. But I'm not really sure that's what you want from an immersive World War II game. It gives it a slightly more cartoonish feel to it, which again is quite uncharacteristic for a Battlefield game, especially one that's set in World War II. I mean, we don't really know. Look, I can't dismiss the trailer. What we saw is what the game looks like. It was very deliberately crafted, scene by scene, to showcase what the game is capable of. So in terms of information on the gameplay, it might be hard to gauge, but from an appearance perspective, it should be fairly accurate. And admittedly, it's pretty weird. So I'm not too sure what DICE were thinking here. I think I might prefer the grittier graphics of Battlefield 1 more, but I guess we'll see once we get some better, less scripted gameplay footage. But speaking of gameplay, we actually got a lot of information about what to expect from the reveal announcement itself. So, gameplay. What will it be like, and how will it be different to Battlefield 1? Many people were skeptical after the trailer was dropped that the gameplay wouldn't be all that much different to what we've seen in Battlefield 1 and other titles. And there are some similarities, don't get me wrong. The slide and the vault will be back. Actually, there was a lot of sliding going on in that trailer. I'm not really sure what was going on there. I hope they haven't made it ridiculous like in the early Battlefield 1 days. The gunplay looks somewhat similar as well. Suppression will be back, it will be much more detailed, and it will relate to the caliber of the weapon used, as well as the size and proximity of the explosions, which will have much more impact, but even then, still not a huge change from Battlefield 1. But in my opinion, Battlefield 5 actually appears to offer players way more variety in terms of mechanics and features, which will 100% make the gameplay far more challenging, tactical, and unique. And it will dramatically increase the skill cap and really open up a world of possibilities in terms of what you can actually do. Which is a pretty big claim so early on, I know, but let me hit you with some examples, starting with the brand new fortifications feature. This seems to be a pretty big addition for Battlefield. They're replacing the gas mask with a gadget called the toolkit, which all classes will have access to. Now, what this allows you to do is fortify a position with sandbags and repair damaged buildings. However, from my understanding so far, you can only do this around objects in the environment, so hopefully you'll only be able to fortify for that bit of extra cover or to build something you can attach a bipod to. So hopefully we shouldn't see people building sniper fortresses on the very edge of the map. And actually what I really like about this feature is that it allows DICE to increase the destructibility of the terrain without messing up the balancing of the maps. In Battlefield 1 operations, for example, if the defending team destroyed all the attackers' cover, it was game over. The attackers couldn't advance, and there wasn't really much they could do about it. So even just from a purely balancing perspective, this is big news. What is also interesting about this feature is the strategic requirements it demands. You can't spam build a fortification, it takes time. And while the support class does apparently build up fortifications faster, it means that you will need to plan ahead, which is not just really cool, but it will also have the effect of spreading out players on the battlefield, taking players away from the front line and encouraging them to defend flags and not just cap them, which could be good if this playstyle is rewarding enough for players to adopt it. Imagine on operations, you can now push into a flag, take control of it, and build up defenses to stop the enemy team from taking it back before you take the other flag in the sector. Or if you're defending and you see your team losing a flag, you can set up a little machine gun nest and suppress the enemy to buy time and allow your allies to contest it again, which sounds pretty awesome. It sounds fun to me. And related to this blurred class concept is that the revive system appears to have also been completely overhauled. DICE have stated that all classes will now be able to revive down allies, but medics will be able to do so faster. And you'll be able to drag down allies out of the line of fire. Now, in my opinion, this is really cool. Not only because it makes the game more realistic, but also from the perspective of gameplay. It slows things down a little bit. It forces medics to take a little bit more care with reviving, and stops them from instant reviving teammates en masse. So many times in Battlefield 1 I get into a situation where I've killed a couple of guys, only to have a Rambo medic slide in 20 seconds later, reviving both of them in half a second, and suddenly I'm faced with a 3-on-1, which really isn't fair. With this change to the revive mechanic, these kinds of situations will become basically non-existent, which I am a fan of. The only risk, I guess, is that we know from Battlefield 1 that medics aren't that great, generally speaking, at doing their job anyway. So by prolonging the time it takes to actually revive someone, you run the risk of getting even less revives in a game, which would not be good. But either way, both the revive and fortification mechanics are far more complex than we've seen in previous titles, and the strategic implications they have are pretty huge. And finally, for my last example on changes to gameplay, the one that I'm most excited about, DICE have scrapped the random bullet deviation and implemented a system where every gun behaves with a specific recoil characteristic. Now, this tells me that one of DICE's primary objectives for Battlefield 5 is to increase the skill cap, and this is reflected by almost every announced change they have made to gameplay. We know that DICE have been trying to introduce a competitive mode in Battlefield 1, Incursions, but with things like aim assist and the random bullet spread, it was always going to be a struggle to be attractive to the quality players, and because of this, there's been a lot of speculation that the Battlefield 1 version was more of a trial run, and it would instead become the focus for Battlefield 5. Now, none of this has been confirmed as yet, but based on the reveal, they're placing heavy emphasis on squad play. They have really opened up the possibilities for strategic play, and they've ditched the random bullet deviation, which will 100% increase the skill cap and does beg the question, will we see a competitive mode released in the early days of the game? I'm very much hoping for yes, and the changes to gameplay do seem to point in that direction, but we will have to wait and see. But that's enough on gameplay. There are loads of things I'm excited about, but it's time to move on. So finally, the next major talking point of the reveal was the announcement of the Tides of War, which is a pretty innovative remodel of the classic DLC system. Now, essentially what this is a sequential focal point for the gameplay, chronologically following the events of World War II, starting at the beginning of the war with the fall of Europe and the Battle of Dunkirk, and presumably continuing through multiple theaters of war, including in the Alpines and in Africa. Now, just a quick speculative point, I really do hope they do take it away from Europe and into Asia and the Pacific. Someone commented on my last video that they would really like to see the war through the Japanese expansion into Asia and viewed from the perspective of the Chinese, Koreans and Indonesians. Definitely some opportunities there for war stories as well. I reckon it'd be really cool if they did this, but this is all pretty innovative. I'm really not sure exactly how it's all going to work, but I do like the fact that they're experimenting with game modes such as the grand operations and themes to make them more immersive and thematic. I just hope they manage to do it successfully, and care is still taken in designing the maps and balancing them for the different game modes, which is a pretty major flaw for many of the Battlefield 1 operations. So if they fix that, I'm a happy man. And on that point, I also hope we don't have to wait like 6 months between each event. I'll go crazy if so, but it's a cool idea in theory anyway. Hard to say at this point how successful it will be. Hopefully DICE has not bitten off more than they can chew. But that's basically all the talking points I have for now. Hopefully, if anything, it somewhat raised your expectations for the game. I know the trailer did leave a sour taste in the mouth for a lot of people out there, but I don't know, I think it has loads of potential if done the right way. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you did and you haven't done so already, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I'm hoping to be fairly active on YouTube over the life of the game, posting tutorials, opinion pieces, gameplay, and hopefully some streaming as well. So if you're interested in that, I'd really appreciate the support. But thanks again for watching. My name's Mr. Dex. Till next time, take care.